Hi everyone, we are doing lesson 26.2 and 26.3 today. I'm kind of combining these lessons just to make it a little bit more concise and compact. But today our goal is to find the inverse of a square or cube root function. So there's a note sheet that goes along with this lesson that I posted in Google Classroom. You need something to write with and maybe a calculator if you want it. Okay, so we're going to talk about inverses today of radical functions, cube roots, and square roots. Now, I'm just going to kind of talk about number one, and then we'll kind of skip over a little couple things. But a function f has the following points: -1, -1, 0, 1, 1, 3, and 2, 5. Find the points for the inverse. Okay, so remember, inverses are opposites of each other. So if these are the points for the function, then its inverse is just going to be all the ordered pairs opposite. We'll flip them. Now you won't be able to tell too much with the -1, -1, but 0, 1 then would become 1, 0. 1, 3 becomes 3, 1. Okay, and 2, 5 becomes 5, 2. So if we're talking about an inverse function, everything is flipped around. So when we look at the functions here, and when we have a square root function, its inverse is going to be a squared function. Okay, and if we have a cubic function, its inverse is going to be a cube root function. So just keep that in mind when we go through some examples. So I'm really just going to jump to the bottom here, where we're finding the inverse function of a radical or a quadratic, okay, any square cube root function. So in this problem, they're starting with x squared plus 4, and they want you to find the inverse, okay? Now, we've done inverses before in the past, and the steps are the same. We're going to change out the function notation for y equals. We interchange the x and the y spots. So all you do is flip them. And then you do whatever you need to get y back by itself. That's the goal. So in this problem, they subtracted 4 on each side. And then to undo a square, you would square root it. Now they're writing it in a little different notation here with that 1/2 exponent, but really all they're doing is square rooting both sides. Okay, so the inverse function is the square root of x minus 4. So again, if we compare this function to the inverse function, everything is opposite. Our function was x squared, the inverse is square root. Our function had a plus 4 in it, our inverse has a minus 4. So that's kind of a quick way to check that you did it right at the end, is if everything is an opposite. Okay, so I'm going to go through these 3 examples for you, and then you'll have some to try on your own on the next page. All right, so if we have to find the inverse of x squared plus 4, okay, we would change this to a y equals. And then step 2 is to interchange the x and the y. So it's going to look something like this. Okay, so I made it x equal to y squared plus 4. Now we have to do whatever we can to get the y back by itself. So first thing I'm going to do is move this 4 out of there. And subtract 4 on each side. That's going to give me x minus 4 is equal to y squared. There. Okay. Now we still have to get y by itself. So to undo a square, we would square root. So whatever we do to the right side, we have to make sure we do the same thing to the left side. So we would have the square root of x minus 4 equal to y. Once you have y back by itself, you know you found the inverse. So our inverse here, if I use the inverse notation, is the square root of x minus 4. And you're done. Once y is back by itself, that's how you know you finished the problem. Okay, so watch me do it again. On the next one, we have g of x is the square root of x minus 5. So again, you change that g of x to y equals, and then we would interchange the x and the y terms. So this is the square root then of y minus 5. Now we have to do whatever we can to get y back by itself. That's the goal. Okay. Now in this problem, everything is stuck under the radical, so we have to start by undoing that radical first. So to undo a square root, we would square both sides. So x squared is equal to y minus 5. Okay, job is still to get y by itself, so I'm going to add that 5 to the other side. So that becomes x squared plus 5 is equal to y. And again, once you have y back by itself, you know you're done. So if that function was g of x, we know g inverse is x squared plus 5. And we are done. Okay, so again, double check your answer and compare it to the original problem. Everything should be opposites. We started with a square root. I ended up with x squared. My function had minus 5. My inverse is plus 5. So everything should be opposite. Okay, I'm going to go through one more for you, and then you guys are going to try the problems on the back side. Okay, so again, change this out for y equals and interchange your x and your y. Okay, so notice on this one, the y is stuck by himself under the radical. So before I can do anything with the radical, we need to isolate that radical first. So in this problem, okay, I actually have to subtract 4 first. Subtract the 4. Now this just becomes x minus 4. We can't do anything with those. Okay, equal to our cube root of y. And now that our radical's by itself, I can undo the radical by cubing both sides. Now, when I cube this left side, though, make sure you cube the whole thing, not just the x and not just the 4. And you don't even have to multiply it out. We're just going to rewrite this as x minus 4 quantity, put parentheses around it. So we say it's the whole thing being cubed. And then y now is by itself. So we know we found the inverse. This was h of x, our function. So h inverse of x equals x minus 4 all cubed. And again, now you know you're done because you got y back by itself. Okay, so all this is doing inverse operations. If you notice, we don't lose any of the numbers, okay, in the problems. We just are rearranging how they look. So every problem still has, like this problem still had plus 4. We still have the 4, now it's just minus 4. Cube root, x to the third power, cubic power. So everything should be opposite. And again, all you're doing is moving things to the other side of the equation. So you shouldn't be losing any of the values. You're just rearranging them. Okay. So I'm going to have you guys try 2 on this page. Okay, let's start with number 1. Number 1 is x minus 2 quantity squared plus 1. Okay, so again, what we do is we change this to y equals, and then interchange the x and the y. So that becomes x equals y minus 2 squared plus 1. So I'm going to go ahead and let you guys finish this one. Do whatever you have to do to get y back by itself, and you should have your inverse function. Now you're going to have to start with that 1, move the 1 over, undo the square, and then solve for y. So go ahead and try this first one. Okay, if you did everything right, you should have the square root. So we started with an x squared. Our inverse should be a square root. So the square root of x minus 1 under the radical, and then plus 2's on the outside because it's after you squared both sides. Okay. Try one more. If we have number 2, again, if I change this to a y equals, interchange the x and the y's. Y plus 5, and then minus 2 is outside the radical. Make sure you isolate your radical first, so move that 2 over. Undo the cube root and solve for y. Should get you the inverse function. Okay, so go ahead and try number 2 and see if you can get it right. Okay, here's my work, and here's everything for this one. So we have x plus 2 quantity cubed, and then minus 5 outside of that. So again, I added the 2 over first. Then I cubed both sides to get rid of the root. And then to do that, to solve for y, I just have to subtract that 5 over on both sides. Okay. Now, I put the answers for 3 and 4 on there in case you wanted to try those, but we're not going to do that in the video today just for the sake of time. But we will practice this more in class tomorrow. But just remember, an inverse function should be opposite. So compare your answer to the original problem. Make sure everything's opposite. Okay? And that's how we do inverse functions.